Musa Mdunge is a political analyst at the University of Dundee in the UK. Musa, good afternoon to you. How important was this for Sunak? If he had lost this, so members of his own party had voted against him, what would have happened?
Well, simply put, Stephen, and good afternoon to you and to your viewers, he would have seen his government collapse. And he would have perhaps been forced to resign. This would have ignited another leadership battle for the Conservative Party in the eve of what we expect would be an autumn election. And likely what would have been a very bad election for the Conservative Party would have really been much worse. And so, kudos to him for winning this. But unfortunately, I believe this is just but the beginning of his headache when it comes to this Rwanda bill, but not only so, when it comes to the rebels within his party who would want to see him gone and see the return of a Liz Truss into power or even a Boris Johnson.
So, could it have been that many MPs supported it just because of that? They don't like the legislation. They don't want Boris back.
Well, it's a mixture of both here, Stephen, right? On the one end, for the Conservative Party and the rebels who did in the end support this bill, it was a matter of the optics. How would it have looked being seen next to the Labour Party's Keir Starmer supporting and rejecting fundamentally this particular bill? What would it look like? What would it communicate to the electorate about such a support fundamentally for Keir Starmer? It would look like a co-sign of Keir Starmer more than a rejection of Rishi Sunak. And so these optics played in the minds of Conservative MPs. Now, the challenge for Rishi Sunak is in the House of Lords, where peers in that house have threatened to amend this particular bill to ensure that it is aligned with international law, to ensure that the European Court of Justice is able to adjudicate on these matters. As you know, UK is still subject to the European Court of Justice. And so unless the Prime Minister brings a legislation or a bill to remove the UK under the control and the ambit of that court, then it is likely that they are still going to see a crisis where this issue goes to the European Court of Justice. And so you already see with the kind of amendments that some of these rebels were trying to put in the bill, which in fact failed. One such MP, Genrick, who brought an amendment calling that European judges be not allowed to adjudicate on this matter, particularly on last-minute injunctions. Unfortunately or fortunately, it failed by 65 to 536 in terms of the votes in the House of Commons. So, he's likely to see more challenges. This is likely to go to the courts with many of those who are facing possible deportation to Rwanda bringing up cases, but as well as from his own MPs who believe that the Conservative Party must stick to its brand as the party of the law. It's very interesting to see Rishi Sunak and the Conservative Party fundamentally turn their back on the law in this case. And for him to make that admission is a show of how politically weakened he is going into these elections. And for the Labour Party, they can only sit back and watch the Conservative Party explode and make the gains out of it. And it's likely that we will see the Labour Party increase their support, as well as the Liberal Democrats as well also increase their support come these autumn elections as we're expecting them to happen.
Musa, you see all sorts of tensions in democracies, and you see issues like this sometimes between sort of what politicians want to do and what judges will allow them to do, what they're allowed to do under the law. You see this happening in South Africa. You see it very much in the United States at the moment. It would seem to me, call me old-fashioned if you like, but the moment politicians start to say, we're going to overrule judges, you usually end up in trouble after that.
Indeed, Stephen. You usually do end up in trouble. And, what's fascinating for me, as somebody who also looks at political strategy is, it baffles me that Rishi Sunak would use this as his charging call to why he should be re-elected. This in no ways makes a dent in the numbers of net migration, as we discussed even last year, where we saw a net migration of 735,000 people enter the United Kingdom. This does nothing to answer that. And while it may give a facade of a government that is dealing with high numbers of foreigners in its country, it does not in any way make a dent to legal migration. And there's a need for the government to really look this particular issue, because unfortunately for the United Kingdom, it is an aging population. And where the world is going, it's going to be a competition of who can attract the best talent in their country. And the United Kingdom has always been seen as one of those safe havens for such to happen. But unfortunately, we see this pushback from the Conservative Party, particularly since 2016's referendum. And it is quite telling to see where the Conservative Party are trying to position the United Kingdom as a global player, as a competitive player that is able to attract talent around the world. And this is not just unique to the United Kingdom. All over the world, we are all being asked to deal with these questions around globalization, even in South Africa, where we have our own questions to answer about migration, about refugees, about how do we deal with the high number of foreigners, and how do we ensure that we leverage still those talents that exist outside of our country that could help develop our own country's talents and abilities in order to see an economy that will grow, that will serve the people. So these are questions, you're quite correct, that are being asked in America, in the United Kingdom, in South Africa, in Canada, in Australia, in mainland Europe. All countries that seem to be that seem to have the levers of economic development and growth in their regions are all being asked these questions. And Rishi Sunak and his challenge is a seminal note for all other leaders to truly think about these issues sober-mindedly, balancing the needs of their domestic population, but also the needs of their economy and the kind of skills they need to attract. So from a political strategy, I don't understand why Rishi Sunak is sitting on this issue. This is something he should have let go and rather look at other issues such as cost of living, inflation, such as creating jobs, the NHS. Those are the things you ought to look at where he could make a dent that would perhaps, if not save the party in the next elections, but really stop the kind of bleeding that we're expected to witness come the autumn elections.
Musa, very quickly, we obviously do expect elections this year. Is there any chance that the Conservatives could stay in power?
Oh, no. No, I don't see it at all. I think that, given how many leadership changes they've had, given that they have a crisis of vision, a crisis of leadership, the party is quite divided. The factional lines have been drawn. It is unlikely that the Conservative Party will win. But I'm still saying that the Labour Party must present a clear vision, a clear strategy and a plan for the country. And it's important to see what Keir Starmer says, what is his response, and whether he comes into the fullness of his role as now the front runner in what is expected to be an election that will be a red wave against the Conservative Party. And he needs to see of the threat of the Liberal Democrats as well, who themselves are making gains and are likely to also make gains in the upcoming election. So this is going to be a very interesting time, but we are likely in the autumn to see Sir Keir Starmer as the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Musa Mdunge, thank you, political analyst based at the University of Dundee in the UK. Do appreciate it. Well,